Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 4 o'clock. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. Formal criminal and civil investigations have been launched into P&O ferries surrounding the recent redundancies. The government's announced the probe is being carried out by the UK's insolvency service. P&O ferries boss Peter Hebblethwaite admitted breaking the law after sacking 800 seafarers last month, replacing them with agency workers on cheaper salaries. The Transport Secretary says his actions must be scrutinised. The first fines issued by the Met Police investigating parties held in Downing Street during lockdown have been handed out. The fixed penalty notices are reportedly related to one of the earliest events under investigation, held in the Cabinet Office on the 18th of June 2020. The £50 fines have reportedly been emailed to junior civil servants. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. That's as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households now across Britain from today. And it comes ahead of the increase to national insurance later this month. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government needs to do much more.
The government response has been utterly pathetic. No real response to that, no comfort to people who are so worried. What we, the Labour Party, have said is, look, the oil and gas companies in the North Sea have made excess profits over and above what they expected because of the high level of pricing across the world. That windfall tax should be used to take up to £600 off people's bills. And that is a practical solution to a very, very real problem.
Specialist police officers are removing environmental activists blocking oil terminals across England. Around 10 sites have been obstructed by hundreds of protesters and several facilities have been forced to suspend operations. The group Just Stop Oil says it's urging the government to stop funding new oil licences. At least 13 arrests have been made so far. GB News reporter Amelia Harper spoke to one protester earlier.
We need to just stop oil, and if that's wind turbines, then I think that's a much, much smaller price to pay than the end of civilization as we know it, and I'm not exaggerating. We need to stop oil now, or our children will have no future.
The mayor of Kiev says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the city. Vitaly Klitschko's also warning those wishing to return to the capital to wait. It comes as the UK's Ministry of Defence claims Ukraine has retaken some of the villages captured by Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian forces have been forced to change their tactics.
To the north of Kyiv, in the direction of Chernihiv, in the Sumy region, the occupiers are being pushed back. We know their plans. We know that they are moving away from the areas where we are beating them to focus on others that are very important, on those where it can be difficult for us.
Well, meanwhile, the Red Cross is sending teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow's agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. Russia's foreign minister said progress had been made at peace talks, and President Zelensky confirmed negotiations are continuing today. Refugees fleeing Mariupol have described the devastation they've witnessed.
I was in Mariupol the whole time. We just slowly watched how the number of our homes was getting smaller every day. Everyone I know, they don't have a house right now. I also don't have a house, and all the belongings that I have with me, that's all I took out.
We waited for the negotiations so much, for 2 or 3 days. But when we realised on March 22nd that we had food left for 2 days, and we were drinking water only by 2 gulps, we decided to leave. But we were leaving under shelling. It was scary.
And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today as a record number of people in the UK have COVID. The Office for National Statistics say an estimated 4.9 million people had the virus at the end of last week. That's up from 4.3 million the week before. People at high risk and some health and social care workers will still be eligible for free tests. Well, this is GB News. We're bringing more news as it happens. Now let's return to Nana.
It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Rishi Sunak, he hasn't got a clue, has he? He frankly doesn't live in the real world. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me how he is allowing the energy companies to get away with daylight robbery, how he lost billions of dodgy COVID loans, and has conveniently shied away from getting government departments to scale back on wasted expenditure. The NHS springs to mind, all of which would plug the current cavern in the country's finances. And don't get me started about foreign aid. He was throwing money around as though it was going out of fashion during the pandemic, and he had to do that anyway because otherwise the country would have gone belly up. He somehow forgot to chuck some towards many of the self-employed, and about 3 million hard-working people, basically the lifeblood of the economy, were left to live off shirt buttons. Now, just as we're getting ourselves upright, he's at it again. But he seems to be throwing the money towards the wrong people, creating policies that go against the grain of common sense and creating misery in their wake. In my eyes, this is happening because many of our politicians do not have a grasp on the real world because they don't actually live in it. The policing minister, Kit Malthouse, claimed that Rishi did understand the real world. He said, "Remember, the Chancellor, just like every MP, is rooted in the experience of his constituency, sitting down in his surgeries, as I will be doing later today, talking to the constituents about their problems and how they live under problems they face." Well, is Rishi rooted to this experience?
Now, I sit here till about 10 o'clock with no light on, and I make a flask of coffee or tea to last me all the time so that I'm not using. I don't think I'm going to be alive for Christmas because I won't be able to keep myself warm.
Or this one?
Working really hard to make ends meet and provide a really good quality service, and you know, just seems a bit unfair really that we're all suffering.
No, I thought not. Rishi made light of the flack he's been getting and compared himself to Will Smith in that people were taking a pop at his wife, who's a billionaire, by the way. I mean, you couldn't make this up. As part of the ministerial code, they must declare the interests of their significant other, especially if, say, for example, they have £1 billion stake in a company, and even more so if that company is currently trading in Russia, for obvious reasons. Rishi failed to declare this, and to my knowledge, this company is still trading with Russia, despite the sanctions being applied across the world to defund Putin's war machine. Rishi either doesn't understand the true reality for those of us on the ground, or he simply doesn't care. If you squeeze the lifeblood out of the population through taxation, you restrict the growth of the economy and the wealth of the nation. So I challenge you, Rishi, to live a week in the shoes of the people who will face the highest level of misery, because the sums don't add up, and that is the problem with this current crisis. If our Chancellor did the math, he would actually know this. So today is April Fool's Day, but it's sadly no joking matter, as millions of us are having to tighten the purse strings as we're hit with the current council tax rise and an increase in energy prices. The costs are putting a frightening squeeze on our living standards, and we've had a huge number of you getting in touch with your concerns. So throughout the day on GB News, we're discussing how you can beat the squeeze, if that's even possible. Now, coming up on Friday Focus at 5, we'll be taking a look at pensions, which are set to rise below the rate of inflation. Now, that is alongside this cost of living crisis, which makes grim reading. People who've saved throughout their life only to see their cash losing its value. Labour is accusing the government of leaving pensioners in the lurch. I'll speak to a pensioner who says it's eat or heat in her household. The Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should MPs hand back their pay rise? Whilst the rest of us are dealing with a rise in the energy price cap, meaning energy firms can charge us more from today, adding about £700 a year to the average household bill, MPs are getting more money. So despite the country struggling with this cost of living crisis, they will see their salary increase by over £2,000 a year. I mean, they would argue that it's not up to them. So if that's the case, I'm asking, should they then hand it back? And we'll be discussing the NHS and whether the public are losing trust in it, the layers of managers, the waiting lists and the scandals, the latest being in maternity care. Public satisfaction in the National Health Service is at its lowest level since 1997 at just 36%. We'll be talking about that before 5 o'clock. Tell me your thoughts on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. Right, let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, political YouTuber Maya Tusi and also media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me on the panel today.
Pleasure,
It's great
always.
to see you. Maya, I've been watching your videos all the time and everything, so it's amazing to get you on the panel. And Christine, we go way back, me and Christine.
Too far. Let's not go there.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with you, Maya, then. What do you think? I mean, this is a crisis, obviously, in the making. Rishi Sunak is coming up with a load of policies that don't appear to be helping those who need to be helped. Well, where do you stand and what's your view on it?
Well, I mean, overall, it's not even just the fault of just individual politicians. It's the whole of the system. What you mentioned, for example, people like Rishi Sunak being out of touch, is spot on, but it's actually deeper than that, because that's the problem with, for example, like the centre-left as well, because they assume that if you get a politician who happens to be from a working-class background and understand the real world, just because you're from that background doesn't mean you understand, which is tricky for voters, because that means we can never tell before we're voting for a politician which one will know, because you could either have a very, very poor working-class politician or a very posh middle-class one, but they both could actually be good, or they both could be equally bad. And this is a fault of a system. Now, we're giving too much power to Westminster, the political class. The government's getting bigger, Parliament's getting bigger, and everything's falling because Starmer could attack Rishi Sunak on, the pensions or on the energy. It doesn't mean that they would do a different job. They would do a similar, different plaster, short-term plaster, but differently. It might look different, but it's the same non-solution, basically.
Yeah, it is a non-solution. I'm surprised that, I mean, I do feel there's a level of detachment because he's so rich that he doesn't really, I mean, even when he tried to fill up his car at the petrol pump, then the mask slipped when he didn't know what he was doing when he had to pay for it, probably because he's got somebody else to pay for it, or probably because he's never filled up his car for years and whatever. But Christine, what's your take on this? I mean, you've been involved in politics for a long time.
Yes, I mean, it's not Rishi Sunak's fault that his wife is a multimillionaire and his father-in-law, etc., etc. It's not his fault. But it does possibly put him out of touch. I mean, he's been ridiculed in the tabloid press in the last few days over, well, everything from his shoes to his shirt, how much the shoes cost, how much the shirt cost, how much everything costs. He's not going to go to Primark, so he possibly doesn't understand that sort of thing. He clearly doesn't need the MPs' increase, but let's just be fair to the MPs just for a moment. I'm here to put the other side just for a moment. It isn't, they haven't voted this for themselves. For years, when my husband was an MP, they had and long before, they had this invidious job of having to vote for it themselves. Now, that is not fair. Nobody else has to vote for their own salary increase. It is never popular for MPs to get more money. Never, never, never. They didn't have one last time, so this is a sort of two-year catch-up. Apparently, the average Secretary of State is getting £4,168 less than they are entitled to if they'd had an uplift last year. Having said that, whether they give it back or not, that is obviously entirely up to them. That's an individual decision. They can't not take it, apparently. The system is there. They have to take it. What they do with it, it's like the £100 heating allowance that I get. I can give that to charity. You can do what you like with it, but they kind of have to take it. It is so crashingly insensitive for it to happen now. Surely the government and Starmer could have got together and said, look, let's just not have this recommendation now. Let's put it off a bit. I mean, it is unbelievable. And I cannot resist quoting. I must quote. I get it absolutely
I'm really excited.
Right.
We could wait till the... OK, go on.
The wonderful... Oh, we're going to do this later.
Yeah, we'll do the quick.
Oh, well, I'll leave it.
Oh, yeah, this is... I can't wait to hear
We'll leave it. OK, fine. So, yes, it's crashingly insensitive, but it's not... And don't forget, we want decent MPs. We don't want the dross in there. We want people in there who could possibly otherwise... And, of course, Rishi Sunak is an example of this. Outside Parliament, he could earn a fortune. Why are people who could earn mega bucks outside ever going to go into politics if they have to sort of struggle along
but that doesn't necessarily...
40,000 a year?
But just because it's not 40,000 40,000 a year. It's £84,000 a year, I think.
If it was
plus
40.
the expenses as well, which people aren't talking about, plus the opportunity for her to have a second job.
Absolutely.
But we will come back to that because we're going to really dissect that and have a real good look at that. But if we bring it back to Rishi Sunak and and we sort of look at him as somebody who is looking after the purse strings, his detachment, I believe, is one of the reasons why what he's come out with really doesn't relate to the normal person. So, for example, one of the things was to reduce VAT on things like heat pumps. And also, I mean, who can afford a heat pump? How much are they? 10 grand?
You'd be 150 before you've paid it off. I know.
VAT on heat pumps.
Yeah.
You know, that's how far. Even to reduce the fuel by 5 pence, which they tried to do, but then some of the pumps didn't even pass it on. But then you have to be able to afford to have a car.
Yep.
See? And a lot of people don't have a car.
Yep. I mean, that on heat pumps that's just driven by all this eco-nonsense, isn't it? Net zero, etc., etc. It's ludicrous. If you look at the economics of heat pumps, it's crazy.
The thing is, you mentioned these sort of like idiotic policies and the plasters, as I call them, is, as I said earlier, the issue I have, and as someone who worked in Parliament for a bit after university and is still involved around kind of drinking and the culture and everything else, I can assure you, everybody, that regardless of if you're working class or middle class or anything else, it's such a weird black hole that if you start being involved and you don't really have any outside world, you actually will lose who you were. You will become out of touch even more. So you could actually have someone, and I know some good Labour friends who actually came from, your trade union, working class backgrounds, but now that they're working at Westminster, where they're civil servants or whatever, they are so out of touch that they completely forgot how life was outside. And it's not to defend Rishi, I'm saying that it's just the fault of the whole culture, the political bubble that we have. So you can't get rid of Rishi, and you can replace him with someone that looks more normal, whatever that means. But the same problem will happen. So we have to kind of talk about draining the swamp.
I agree.
In theory, all MPs go back to their constituencies at weekends and during the recess, where they meet normal people, ordinary people,
that doesn't help.
face to face. It should,
Keith
in
Malthouse
theory.
said,
No, I know. No, we're saving him for later.
I know, but that's nonsense. Just because you meet real people doesn't mean that you understand real people. It's like when left-wing teachers say, you can't debate with me about education because I'm a teacher. Just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you're an expert.
You know everything.
And also, the other thing is, if you look at the money side of it as well, instead of, if somebody says to you, look, you need to cut back, the first thing you do is look at your own finances and say, what have I paid too much on? I wanted to see the government do more of that. Yeah. Go and look at the health service and say, look, we're wasting money on procurement, they could actually save all the money they're coming to us for. And just because we give them 12 billion doesn't mean they're going to spend it properly.
I've got my little list here. 800 million pounds on smart motorways, which are going to be highly dangerous. 100 billion. It's money people can't even contemplate. Billions. How much is a billion? On HS2, 15 billion on foreign aid, NHS track and trace, 40 billion. I mean, need I go on?
It's just ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
So I want to see them actually doing some budgeting, because I think if they actually did that, we wouldn't be in this mess. Just budget a bit and we wouldn't need to do this anyway. If you've just joined us, where have you been? I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. Still to come, the great British debate this hour. I'm asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? So from today, households will be paying more for their energy, with the average home seeing bills rise by around about 700 quid. Not only that, but council tax also up by around 3%. And MPs, however, have seen their salary increase by over £2,000. So should they have it withdrawn? I feel that they should, but what do you think? You can send your thoughts to GBViews at gbnews.uk. Perhaps they could donate it to charity. Or tell us what you think. You can also tweet me at GBNews. Maybe you think perhaps that they're not paid enough. Really? There's also a poll up on Twitter right now asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? Cast your vote, but first, let's get some weather.
Hello again. Bit of a chill out there this afternoon, and it's not going to get much warmer over the weekend. It's going to be cold and frosty tonight. An ice risk and still some sleet and snow showers in a few spots. High pressure, though, is in control of our weather, and it will bring most of us a fine weekend. But there's this weather front driving south, and notice the isobars are still quite close together, making for quite a strong wind and an icy wind this evening across Kent. But the showers here are fading. Some showers keeping going over parts of eastern England, which is why it could turn icy here. And we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. And then wet weather heading south across Northern Ireland. Mostly rain here, but as it comes across Wales, we will see some snow here, mostly over hills, but some down to lower levels, particularly through the early hours. It is going to be a cold night with a fairly extensive frost even in towns and cities, and some rural spots maybe down to -5 or -6. Watch out for the ice in the morning as well. Still some wintry showers coming in across eastern England. Showers across South Wales, southwest England in the morning, mostly of rain, but again, some sleet, snow and hail is possible. And we'll keep 1 or 2 scattered showers across England and Wales through the day, but some good spells of sunshine. Most of Scotland and Northern Ireland having a dry, fine Saturday with some sunshine, but it ain't warm. Temperatures in single figures for the most part, but those strong, bitter winds will be much lighter during Saturday. Light winds and clear skies, though, means tumbling temperatures once more. So if you're out on Saturday night, be prepared for that. It will be a cold and frosty start to Sunday. Again, where we keep 1 or 2 showers going, it could also be a little icy on Sunday morning. Generally, though, another fine day for the vast majority. Maybe 1 or 2 showers around the coast in the west and the east coast. It will cloud over across Northern Ireland during Sunday afternoon with some rain trickling in here and into northwestern parts of Scotland. But for many, Sunday is also dry and bright. Still on the cold side, however, with highs of just 9 or 10 Celsius. Goodbye.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there. Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
This is GB News. It's coming up to 24 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. So I'm still with my panel, political YouTuber Maya Tusi and also media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Now, before the break, we were discussing whether MPs have any idea about the real world. When the Crime and Policing Minister Kit Malthouse was asked if Chancellor Rishi Sunak knew how difficult the cost of living crisis was for people in the UK, he said, I quote, "Remember, the Chancellor, just like every MP, is rooted in the experience of his constituency, sitting down in his surgeries, as I will be doing later today, talking to the constituents about their problems and how they live under the problems they face. Perhaps what would be interesting, though, do you remember that show years ago where some MP was challenged to live on the minimum wage? That's what I'd like to see. Rishi, give that a go. So I'm asking if MPs have any idea about the real world. Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Leslie says Britain is crying out for new politics. Years of voting for self-serving career politicians, Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats, have got Britain into the mess it's in now. Stuart says we need Sunak to fall on his sword. In my opinion, he is the worst and most out-of-touch Chancellor we have ever had. Keep your thoughts coming. Don't mince your words, really, seriously. Right, it's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? Now, today on the show, we're focusing on the cost of living crisis and the impact rising costs will be having on families. How do we beat the squeeze? UK households will see their energy bills rise, council tax increases and more. Remember the national insurance rise as well, that's coming soon. But despite our rising costs, MPs have seen their salary increase by £2,212 in a year. So that means that they'll see their pay packet rise to £84,144. That's up from £81,932. In the Scottish Parliament, MSPs will see their pay rise to £66,662, up from £64,470, an increase of 3.4%. So I'm asking, as we face a cost of living crisis across the UK, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? Before we discuss that, let's take a look at the changes to the cost of living which came into effect today. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, has the details.
We're heading for the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s, and Rishi Sunak's spring statement measures will do little to offset that drop. This cost of living squeeze has been months in the making. As we emerged from lockdown, global supply chains remained broken. Demand has surged, but our economy struggled to get into gear, causing prices to rise. Even before Vladimir Putin chose to invade Ukraine, UK inflation was at a 30-year high. Now this conflict's stopping Russian and Ukrainian crops and energy exports reaching global markets, again causing prices to spiral. From today, April the 1st, household utility bills go up by 54% on average to almost £2,000 a year, with bills set to rise even further in the autumn. Also from today, council tax bills rise by 3% on average, although those in bands A to D are in line for a £150 rebate. From next week, national insurance contributions increase by 1.25 percentage points for employers and employees. That will cost basic rate taxpayers an extra £178 a year on average, while those on higher rate tax will pay, again on average, £715 more. As these higher bills and tax rises take hold, wheat, barley and fertiliser prices are also soaring, pushing up food and drink prices in the shops, restaurants and pubs. Petrol and diesel costs are also on the up, of course. It's now almost £100 to fill up a family car. And Sunak's spring statement fuel duty cut has been only partly passed on by retailers, with pump prices still rising. GB News has been highlighting inflation and the rising cost of living for months. But today's a day when the cost of living squeeze got significantly tighter.
So you see, there's the impact we're going to see in our bills each month, but on the very same day we see our bills rise. MPs have seen their salaries increase by over £2,000. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should MPs have the pay rise withdrawn? I'm also joined now by personal finance expert Laura Retty. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Now, people's finances will be in shock today because they're facing larger bills coming out of their account. Is there anything that people can do to get on top of this?
There's lots of little tricks and tips and money-saving tips that I can give, but none of them are really going to scrape the sides of the huge crushing wave of energy bills. Stacked on top of that, rising inflation. If you haven't got a fixed rate mortgage, for example, your mortgage is set to rise because interest rates are rising. So there's not really a huge amount I can say that's going to make a big difference. What I would say, if you are struggling already You need to talk to your providers. Don't bury your head in the sand. They have lots of different schemes and grants that you might be eligible for. So do pick up the phone and talk to them. They can't cut you off. They've got to give you 7 days notice, and they've got to give you some reasonable ways to pay as well. If you do struggle with that, then speak to step change charities, citizens advice charities. My concern, though, is that there's going to be an awful lot of people contacting these charities and these organisations, and we could be in a position they're just going to be completely flawed with the volume. Secondly, if you're just about managing and you think, oh gosh, this is a lot of money, but I think I might just be able to manage, then budget. That's really, really key. There's lots of free apps. Pay down interest-bearing debts as soon as you can.
Yeah, of course,
switch to 0% credit cards, things like that.
If your credit hasn't been wrecked during the pandemic. Laura, thank you so much for your thoughts and your ideas. Laura Rett, she's a personal finance expert. I'm also joined now by David Mellor. He's the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury. David, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the biggest cost of living crisis we've seen in around about 30 years. How damaging do you think this is going to be to UK households?
Extremely damaging. Extremely damaging. You see, politicians and all the rest of us have got used to low inflation. I'm old enough, which I'm happy to tell you probably are not, to remember when we had rampant inflation of nearly 30% at one point in this country. And inflation is totally destructive of everyone's cost of living. And of course, it's totally impossible for the Chancellor to do what he wants to do if all that's happening is that a lot of money he'd rather spend elsewhere is being spent on servicing the national debt. I mean, if we maintain inflation at around 8%, that'll cost an extra £20 billion to service the debt. And so you'll get to the situation we were in the 70s, when the cost of servicing the debt became one of the biggest public expenditure commitments of the government. It meant the money couldn't be spent on a lot of things that the government would prefer to spend it on, pensions, education, all that kind of thing.
So was there anything that he could have done then differently in your eyes? And if so, what would that have been?
Well, I think that the problem is that the government are going to this crisis.
Oh, that's such a shame, because I would have loved to have heard that answer to that question. That's such a shame. We've lost him, sadly. That was, of course, David Mellor. He was the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Now, Richard Lloyd, the chair of the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority who set MPs' pay, said this is the first increase in pay for MPs in 2 years and follows the average of increases across the public sector last year. MPs play a vital role in our democracy, and this is reflected in their pay. It is right that MPs are paid fairly for the responsibility and the unseen work they do, helping their constituencies, which dramatically increased last year. For Parliament to reflect society, it is vital that people from all walks of life can be an MP. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and digital radio. After the break, we'll continue with our Great British Debate. And I'm asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? Households across the UK are facing a spike in bills from today. The average family will be spending around about £700 more each year on their energy. But as we face a fight to beat the squeeze, MPs have been given a pay rise of over £2,000. So I'm asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? You'll hear the thoughts from my panel, political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. First, though, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 4:33. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. Formal criminal and civil investigations have been launched into P&O Ferries surrounding the recent redundancies. P&O Ferries boss Peter Hebblethwaite admitted breaking the law when the company sacked 800 seafarers last month, replacing them with agency workers on cheaper salaries. The first fines issued by the Met Police investigating parties held in Downing Street during lockdown have been handed out. The fixed penalty notices relate to one of the earliest events under investigation held in the Cabinet Office on the 18th of June 2020. The £50 fines have reportedly been emailed to junior civil servants. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households in Britain from today as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. It comes ahead of the increase to national insurance. 19 environmental protesters have been arrested after blockading several oil terminals across England. The group Just Stop Oil says they're calling on the government to stop funding new oil licences. Several facilities were forced to suspend operations. The mayor of Kiev says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the city and is warning those wanting to return to the capital to wait. The UK's Ministry of Defence claims Ukraine has retaken some of the villages captured by Russia. But it says Kiev and Chernihiv are facing continued missile strikes despite Russian claims of reduced activity. And the Red Cross is sending teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow's agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. Peace talks are said to be continuing today. Well, on TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We're back to Nana Akua in just a moment.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
You're with me, Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. And I'm still with my panel, political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Now, before the break, we were discussing whether MPs have any idea about the real world. When the Crime and Policing Minister Kit Malthouse was asked if Chancellor Rishi Sunak knew how difficult the cost of living crisis was for people in the UK, he made a few comments and said that, remember, the Chancellor, just like every MP, is rooted in the experience in his constituency, sitting down in his surgeries, as I will be doing later today, talking to the constituents about their problems and how they live under their problems they face. So what do you think then? Let's have a quick look at what you've all been saying with your thoughts, because we return to our Great British Debate. You've been saying, Doug says if MPs were to agree not to take a pay rise, because the question was whether they should have their pay rise withdrawn, it would demonstrate a degree of solidarity with a large percentage of the population they continue to say that they represent. Paul says people often forget about all the benefits, yes, we're going to come on to those, that MPs get as well. They ought to be cut. Percy says, for the job that most MPs do, frankly, they should be paying us. You think, I agree with you. Let's see what my panel make of that. Of course, I'm joined by political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Christine, now, you know a lot about politics. Your husband is still into politics. You were a secretary at one point as well and got involved.
Well, I spent my entire life in politics ever since I left university. And funny enough, David Mellor mentioned the 70s, which I remember extremely well, when inflation, you really thought, if I don't buy it today, it'll be twice the price the next day. It was unbelievable. And I hate it when people say, you're not old enough to remember, but a lot of people are not old enough to remember quite how frightening rampant inflation is. And it was only when the Tories got in 79, in particular in the shape of Margaret Thatcher, that she grabbed the country by the ghoulies. And slowly she got the economy back in shape. It seems to be that this current government isn't really a Conservative government. That's one of the problems. And as just going back to Rishi, while we're on the sort of let's bash Rishi moment, he does go back to his constituency occasionally. First of all, he obviously doesn't go back as much as normal MPs because he does have everything else he has to do as Chancellor. And also he's going back to an extremely well-heeled constituency, Richmond in Yorkshire.
What I was going to say.
Where he will not meet anything like the number of really hard-up cases that if you're going to some inner city constituency somewhere. So I think he probably is rather more shielded from the real world than a lot of MPs are. Not his fault, he represents that seat. But what is the question? Should MPs give it back? Somebody out there may know, but I don't think there is a mechanism for them to not accept it, because they've all been given it. It would have to be a total vote of the whole of the House of Commons, take all that money, put it in a pot and do it with something else with it. I just don't think they can do it. So it's up to the individual conscience of each MP.
Well, what about the committee that deal with the pay rise, though? I mean, look, they're nowhere to be seen. We tried to get them on, and they're like, oh, no, we're not going to... They left us with a statement which we'll put out there, but they're a public committee that we pay for. If they're doing things, they need to be accountable.
That's the problem. It's a doom of, like, it's a cycle of doom we're living in. You've got partly the politicians that we elect, and then the rest of we've got the state. And that includes your NHSers, your IPSers and all these guys, where you can't really hold them to account because they can't bring them here. They are being held to account by MPs, and again, it's a cycle of doom. The problem we have is that, as we already covered, it's evident that it's a bad look right now for them to get a pay rise. And we also covered that it's not them directly giving themselves a pay rise. Let's get that over with. The problem I have is it's the fault of the overall state that got so big that IPSA, their mechanism is based on status quo. We need to fix one tiny, simple problem, which is complicated, ironically, is we need to redefine the role of an MP. Is it actually still old school? Is a part-time role and you're representing your constituency and all that? Or is it supposed to be a full-time career, kind of like a political career? Because if it is going to be that, then yes, I can justify, and IPSA could justify, high salary, 70, 80k and all this.
But that is a high salary.
But if it's a part-time thing, because right now the role of a backbench MP is basically a glorified councillor, with less power than a local councillor. Why do we give them a salary? IPSA are treating them as someone who is, like a top NHS manager. And, they work hard. Like, everyone works hard. Like, a nurse works hard, a teacher works hard, but, you can't just treat them like a full-time careerist.
Well, I mean, every MP is different, and I think the vast majority of MPs, let's defend MPs for a moment, the vast majority of MPs go into the business because they want to change things, whatever it is. Now, most of them go in with very, very good intentions, and half the House of Commons thinks that the other half have got the wrong ideas, etc., etc., but they all basically want the same thing. They want the best for this country and for people in it. That is what motivates most MPs. Now, obviously, things go awry in various quarters, but if you don't get good quality people in Parliament, and if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, you will not have, because of our system, you will not have a high calibre of people from which to draw your cabinet ministers and your junior ministers.
Oh, right. I don't agree with that.
Too often, we've seen ministers who are frankly not up to the job, and they are overruled by the faceless civil servants.
Yes.
And that's not right.
You know, the problem is, if you want the talent also includes the successful career people like Rishi, then we're going to end up with people like Rishi, and then we're going to criticise them that they're too out of touch and rich. The issue is it's not necessarily just we have to decide what the role is, and then you can if you clarify that it is now a full-time career, and that means you can get your Donald Trumps, the business people, and you could get your Angela Rayner's, and then you could get all sorts of people to come in and get the
Donald
same
Trump
salary.
and Angela Rayner on the same thing. That's one over there, one down there, one.
Also, it's made in Britain for some reason, don't I?
Yeah, but you know, I don't buy into the notion that you won't get the best people if people because look, when I started in radio, I did hospital radio. I did it for nothing because I was so passionate about it. My first jobs in media and TV, I did for nothing. I did it to get the experience to do it. By the way, that was about 30 years ago. But I did, honestly. I mean, you wouldn't get away with paying me nothing now, I can tell you that now, just saying that out loud. But what I'm saying is that the bottom line is it's not about being passionate but about the money. It's about being passionate for the job. And if you don't have that and you're only doing it for the money, then there is the worry that you get people who are only coming for the money. And you don't want that.
No, absolutely. And this is why it's impossible to get the happy medium. But you don't want anybody to be put off going into politics because they aren't going to get enough money to feed their family, etc. And you don't want people going in because of the money. And it's very, very difficult balancing act.
But it's not just what they get paid there, because on top of top of their pay, they also get loads of other things too. They get, for example, they also get their expenses. They get expenses on this, and rent on a second residence. So that's or hotel costs in their constituency if their constituency is outside London. They get free accommodation in London from friends and relatives. So there's loads of things going on there. They can claim gas, electricity, and water bills to a second home. So they're not going to feel the squeeze like we all are.
To add something, when we always say, but we want the best people, what do we mean by the best people? Because
exactly,
is it like people get things done or do more things? Because as a libertarian, I don't want politicians to do much. I actually don't want the best people.
Less government.
But don't be too ambitious. Stop trying to help. The less they try to help, the better. So when the federal government in America gets shut down for like a couple of weeks, it's actually the best time in America.
I know.
Actually, they don't do things. So I want politicians to do less. So give them less power, and then that means I don't care if you're the best person or the worst person. As long as you don't have enough power to ruin my life, then I don't care.
Well, I mean, look, that wasn't all of it, though, was it? Because they can claim the cost of phone calls, computers, and things like that. I mean, there's so much that they can do for that, and they get subsidies on restaurants and public transport, and they can claim phone calls and computing expenses. I mean, that's on top of the £84,000. So, you know, you had that in, that's like, you know, that's over 100 grand right there. But this show, as ever, is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome on our great British voice and their opportunity to be on the show and give us their view on the topics we're discussing. Jackie Van Lowen is from Hertfordshire. Jackie, welcome on board. Now, Jackie, how are the sort of the whole energy thing affecting you, and what do you think about the pay rises that these MPs are getting?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. Second of all, the energy crisis, it is a really big crisis, and I'm fearful of my bill coming in. In actual fact, we've started to turn off everything, and we're only really going to heat the rooms that we're in. What do I think about the pay rise for the MPs? Well, they're entitled to a pay rise, but I also think that if it's coming out of the public purse, then that same percentage should also go to other people who work in the public sector, like nurses, like teachers. And I think it was very interesting to hear you talk about that MPs could claim other expenses. When teachers were working from home over the last couple of years, I very much doubt that they were able to put in an expense for their own computers and when they were teaching online and for their own phone bills. So actually, I think if it's one rule for one, then it should be one rule for everybody across the public sector.
Yeah, you'd think it would be, wouldn't you? But it frankly just isn't. Jackie, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Jackie at Van Lowen. She's there in Hertfordshire. Now, today I'm asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Andy says no, but being an MP should be the only job they have. Yes, I forgot to mention that. On top of the expenses, they can also do a second job.
That's the problem I have, yeah.
It's ridiculous, ridiculous. Neil says, I would like a massive pay rise to £150,000 for all MPs, with the caveat of no expenses, no second or third jobs. Fair enough.
No.
That wouldn't work, Christine. You don't think it would?
Well, it wouldn't work because some MPs do the square root of all, and therefore they would be getting 150 or whatever he suggested with no expenses whatsoever. I mean, at least with the expenses, you have to put in a chitty now. You put in a chitty and no, I wouldn't go for that. Just give them a massive increase.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't give them a pay rise at all.
No.
And I'd cut their expenses, if I'm honest. What we've got here, Ron says the pay rise is peanuts, it's their expenses that are the major rip-off. Well, the point is, if you add it all together, it does make quite a lot of money. Does your employer pay your gas, electric, broadband and house upkeep? The answer is obviously no. There's also a poll up on Twitter today throughout the show asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? And currently, guess what? How many do you think? 84% of you say yes, they should have it withdrawn, and just 16% say no. If you just joined me, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, could we be losing trust in the NHS? Public satisfaction with the National Health Service is at its lowest level since 1997, with just 36% of people satisfied with the service. We'll discover that after the weather.
Hello again. Bit of a chill out there this afternoon, and it's not going to get much warmer over the weekend. It's going to be cold and frosty tonight. An ice risk and still some sleet and snow showers in a few spots. High pressure, though, is in control of our weather, and it will bring most of us a fine weekend. But there's this weather front driving south, and notice the isobars are still quite close together, making for quite a strong wind and an icy wind this evening across Kent. But the showers here are fading. Some showers keeping going over parts of eastern England, which is why it could turn icy here. And we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. And then wet weather heading south across Northern Ireland. Mostly rain here, but as it comes across Wales, we will see some snow here, mostly over hills, but some down to lower levels, particularly through the early hours. It is going to be a cold night with a fairly extensive frost even in towns and cities, and some rural spots maybe down to -5 or -6. Watch out for the ice in the morning as well. Still some wintry showers coming in across eastern England. Showers across South Wales, southwest England in the morning, mostly of rain, but again, some sleet, snow and hail is possible. And we'll keep one or two scattered showers across England and Wales through the day, but some good spells of sunshine. Most of Scotland and Northern Ireland having a dry, fine Saturday with some sunshine, but it ain't warm. Temperatures in single figures for the most part, but those strong, bitter winds will be much lighter during Saturday. Light winds and clear skies, though, means tumbling temperatures once more. So if you're out on Saturday night, be prepared for that. It will be a cold and frosty start to Sunday. Again, where we keep one or two showers going, it could also be a little icy on Sunday morning. Generally, though, another fine day for the vast majority. Maybe one or two showers around the coast in the west and the east coast. It will cloud over across Northern Ireland during Sunday afternoon, with some rain trickling in here and into northwestern parts of Scotland. But for many, Sunday is also dry and bright. Still on the cold side, however, with highs of just 9 or 10 Celsius. Goodbye.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
It's coming up to 55 minutes after 4 o'clock on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, on the show today, I'm joined by political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Now, we're talking about NHS because, as we know, it is the National Health Service and it is the sacred cow. You're certainly not allowed to say anything bad about it. But new research suggests that public satisfaction with it is at its lowest level since 1997. The figures that are cast by Nat Sen suggest that 36% of voters are not content with the way the health service, or are content actually, the way the health service is performing and is run. It suggests that the collapse has been driven by frustration over long waiting times for all the main types of NHS care, the service's persistent staff shortages and a widespread belief that the government has denied it the funding it needs. I'm joined now by Dr. Raphael Alaya, an NHS doctor. Dr. Alaya, thank you for joining me. Now, are you surprised with these findings?
I'm not surprised after hearing what's been in the news and over the last 2 years. I think, first of all, it's mitigating circumstances and extenuating circumstances through the black swan event of COVID, which no one expected and no healthcare system was ready for. So that's the first thing. But hearing that statistic as an NHS doctor, I'm sure anyone that's worked for the NHS is going to be embarrassed by that number. And it's quite abysmal, to be honest. And, the prestige of the NHS, the prestige of the nursing and medicine training and education system and all the colleges, to see that figure, it gives us a message that something serious needs to be done about it. And, as a matter of urgency, if that number of people, 74% are unhappy, very dissatisfied with the NHS. But what can we do about it? That's the question.
That's a good question, because you know what? Before the pandemic, because I know the pandemic obviously showed a lot of the gaps, but actually I think the NHS did actually come up and perform as required and did a good job. But before that, these failings were apparent. Where do you believe the biggest failings are?
What do I believe the biggest failings are? I think as an NHS doctor, I'd say, we should ask how can we improve it. That's how I'd like to, have my input on this. And first of all, I'd say, I think it starts with the staff well-being. I think the other big companies in the world, highly respected companies that are doing well, whether publicly funded or private, they take a keen interest in making sure the staff, regardless of the level of the staff, senior or junior, they make sure that their well-being is high. And of course, well-being is a big word, and it can mean many different things to many different people. And, that could be with the pay, that could be with the nutrition, that could be with the sleep, but staff well-being, and which has effects on the morale and how well they can do their job, especially when it comes to healthcare. If any industry should know, then of course it's healthcare. That's the first thing. Secondly, it's the technology interoperability. The data and the technology in NHS, a lot of it is quite disjointed. And if there was better communication between it, different healthcare, smaller systems could communicate better. That's the second one. So the third one is, I think, the performance indicators and the performance incentives from the top level of management, all the way down to the clinical shop floor level, should the incentive should be that they should be clear, because if someone's going to be a really good doctor or a really good nurse, they should be rewarded for it, and sometimes they can be a really wide spectrum.
Well, listen,
And,
Dr. Raphael Alea, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. He's an NHS doctor. I'll quickly throw it to my panel very quickly. Your experience of the NHS, Christine?
Well, I have to say I'm in that 36 or whatever percentage it was, because every time I've been in the last 2 or 3 years, including in COVID, to my local huge, great big hospital, which serves a very diverse area, I have been very, very impressed. And I have to say that my GP surgery, I've had to wait a bit, and I've done, telephone consultations instead of face-to-face, but basically I am very, very satisfied with my experience. But I mean, it's the envy of the world, but nobody copies it. I mean, we need to start charging for certain things. It should not be free at the point of delivery for everybody. It shouldn't.
Just a quick point. When people say, "Oh, it's the last couple of years that's caused all this trouble," it's not. Firstly, the last couple of years, the Dutch system didn't come down, French system didn't come down, Swiss system didn't come down, Scandinavians didn't come down. It's been going on for years and years because it's so faceless, and we're going to talk about it a lot, obviously, especially over the last few months anyway. The whole system needs to be no longer reformed. And I say controversially, abolish, but to a point where you actually have a proper universal system, like Switzerland, like the rest of Western Europe, so you still have it universally access, but stop having politicians running it.
Stop having politicians running it.
People should be able to pay for private health as well.
Absolutely.
Tax relief on private healthcare,
Tax relief on private healthcare. Well, what are your thoughts? You're watching me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. More to come in the next hour. It's 5 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of those big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. I'm Miranda Shunkett in the GB newsroom. Formal criminal and civil investigations have been launched into P&O ferries surrounding the recent redundancies. The government's announced the probe is being carried out by the UK's insolvency service. P&O Ferries boss Peter Hebblethwaite admitted breaking the law when the company sacked 800 seafarers last month, replacing them with agency workers on cheaper salaries. The first fines have been issued by the Met Police investigating parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. The fixed penalty notices relate to one of the earliest events under investigation held in the Cabinet Office on June the 18th, 2020. The £50 fines have reportedly been emailed to junior civil servants. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households in Britain from today as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year, and it comes ahead of the increase to national insurance later this month. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government needs to do much more.
The government response has been utterly pathetic. No real response to that, no comfort to people who are so worried. What we, the Labour Party, have said is, look, the oil and gas companies in the North Sea have made excess profits over and above what they expected because of the high level of pricing across the world. That windfall tax should be used to take up to £600 off people's bills. And that is a practical solution to a very, very real problem.
19 environmental protesters have been arrested after blockading several oil terminals across England. The group called Just Stop Oil says they want the government to stop funding new oil licences. Several facilities were forced to suspend operations because of the obstructions. GB News reporter Amelia Harper spoke to one protester earlier.
Need to just stop oil, and if that's wind turbines, then I think that's a much, much smaller price to pay than the end of civilization as we know it, and I'm not exaggerating. We need to stop oil now, or our children will have no future.
The mayor of Kiev says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the city. Vitaly Klitschko is also warning those wishing to return to the capital should wait. It comes as the UK's Ministry of Defence claims Ukraine has retaken some of the villages captured by Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian forces have been forced to change their tactics.
To the north of Kyiv, in the direction of Chernihiv, in the Sumy region, the occupiers are being pushed back. We know their plans. We know that they are moving away from the areas where we are beating them to focus on others that are very important, on those where it can be difficult for us.
Well, meanwhile, the Red Cross has sent teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow had agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say they're breaking their promise and that it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. Russia's foreign minister said progress had been made at peace talks and President Zelensky confirmed negotiations are continuing. Refugees fleeing Mariupol have described the devastation they've witnessed.
I was in Mariupol the whole time. We just slowly watched how the number of our homes was getting smaller every day. Everyone I know, they don't have a house right now. I also don't have a house, and all the belongings that I have with me, that's all I took out.
We waited for the negotiations so much for 2 or 3 days. But when we realised on March 22nd that we had food left for 2 days and we were drinking water only by 2 gulps, we decided to leave. But we were leaving under shelling. It was scary.
And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today as a record number of people in the UK have COVID. The Office for National Statistics say an estimated 4.9 million people had the virus at the end of last week. That's up from 4.3 million the week before. People at high risk and some health and social care workers will still be eligible for free tests. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Coming up in a few minutes' time, it's time for my Friday Focus. We'll look at the impact the cost of living crisis is having on pensioners. From today, household energy bills will cost the average bill payer £700 more per year. Now, there's also increases in council tax and loads more. And with pensions set to rise less than the rate of inflation, Labour is accusing the government of leaving pensioners in the lurch. I'll be joined by a pensioner who says it's eat or heat in her household. The Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? Environmental activists have targeted a number of oil terminals this morning. The group, called Just Stop Oil, says it blocked 10 sites across the UK in a mass protest over demands that the government stops new oil and gas projects. But as UK households face record rises on their energy bills, I'm asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? I'll speak to the spokesperson from the group, and we'll go to our 4 corners of the UK to find out from our Great British Voices how the cost of living crisis is impacting their lives. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. So across the day on GB News, we're reacting to the cost of living crisis and asking, how do we beat the squeeze? So for my Friday Focus this week, we'll look at the impact of the cost of living crisis and what it's having on pensioners across the UK. From today, the average household will now be paying around about £700 more a year for energy. And that's not all. There's been a hike in council tax, fuel, and even postage stamps. National insurance contributions will also rise this month. Now, the rise in living costs is affecting everybody. But with pensioners, they're reliant on their pensions rising at the same rate as inflation. And that's where traditionally the triple lock system would have come in. It guarantees pensions rise to match inflation, but that won't be reintroduced until April next year. So that leaves the state pension set to rise by just 3.1% compared to an estimated 7.4% rise in inflation. So have the elderly been left behind? Joining me now is Jackie Winterburn, who's a pensioner from Hertfordshire. Jackie, thank you so much for joining me. Now, how is the cost of living affecting you?
It's scary. It's really starting to scare me, because I was looking at the prices when I got the phone call about coming on here. I'm comparing prices of what I paid pre-COVID. Now, for a bottle of milk, I would pay £1.50, and now I'm paying £2, between £2 and £2.30. My husband has to have a special diet because he's got kidney problems, and I can't purchase ordinary, what I call plastic bread, sliced bread. So I use our local bakers, and their bread's gone up from £1.95 a loaf to £2.50 a loaf. Now, again, with my husband's kidney problems, he has to drink a lot of fluids. He's not allowed coffee because it's got too much potassium. So we drink a lot of lemon squash, and lemon squash has gone up from £1 a bottle to now between £1.75 and £1.85 a bottle. I just don't know where we can go. I was looking at my finances, and the only thing that I can do to be able to afford the fuel price increases is to cancel all our insurance policies.
No, you've got to be careful with that. You've got to be...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, if something goes wrong with my cooker or my washing machine or the fridge, I can't afford to replace them. So I've always had insurance. But that has got to go. I've got no choice. It's got to go. Because otherwise I just won't be able to afford to keep the house warm because of Gary. I mean, my husband, because of his kidney problems, I have to keep the house warm. His sleep pattern's terrible, so he's awake at night. So I have to have the heating on 24 hours a day. And I just really don't know. I just feel like I'm suffocating. I just don't know.
And for you, I mean, what kind of a pension do you have? Is it a state pension, or is it something that you saved up yourself across your working life?
Well, I saved up. I did take early retirement to look after my husband. So I don't actually qualify yet for a state pension. So the pensions that we get are very, very small. And yes, we do get topped up with universal credit. But I can't afford now to take my husband to the hospital because I can't afford the fuel, because our hospital isn't down the road. It's 20 miles away. The same with my daughter, unfortunately, has got a long-term illness, and her hospital now is within the low emission zone.
Oh, goodness.
So
I
have to pay the extra for that.
I know. Those things are popping up all over the place, and it's frightening. And if you don't pay them, you get yourself in all sorts of other difficulties. Now, I know that you also run a lunch group for other pensioners. What sort of thing are they saying? How are they being affected by this?
Well, the problem is unless people get top-up benefits, like disability allowance and things like that, they can't afford to come to our lunch club. We have to charge a nominal amount because otherwise we don't get our funding. But we're missing out on all those people who desperately need it but can't afford it because they don't get any additional benefits. So these people are still falling through the loop.
And the thing is, because obviously what is happening is your money is becoming worth less as things become more expensive. There doesn't seem to be a way out. Jackie, I'm going to be speaking to a pension expert, and we'll see if they've got any ideas or tips that could be helpful. I don't know, but thank you so much for your view, and thank you for talking to us about that so eloquently. That's Jackie Winterbourne. She's a pensioner struggling, as we all are, to get through the cost of living crisis. I'm also joined now by Rebecca O'Connor, who's Head of Pensions and Savings at Interactive Investor. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us. Now, I want to ask you, first of all, because people talk a lot about this triple lock and not fully understanding what it means and what impact it could have had if it was still in effect, because I know it takes effect next year. Would that have been helpful? And if you could just tell people what that is.
Yeah, it would have been helpful if it had been in place this year. And the reason the government decided to scrap it for 1 year was that it would have led to a strong rise this year that the government felt was disproportionate at the time it had to set the state pension triple lock. So what the triple lock is a rise in the state pension that is either in line with annual earnings or 2.5% or inflation, and whichever is the higher. And last year, the earnings post-pandemic, if you remember, were sky high, like over 8%. So that would have resulted in a significant rise in the state pension this year. Now, back at the end of last year, that seemed unreasonable because we hadn't seen this huge rise in inflation that we are now at the very beginning of, actually. And so the government decided to scrap the triple lock, introduce a double lock for 1 year, and that meant that the state pension this year is rising by 3.1%. Now, of course, that now looks very mean in comparison with the huge price rises that we're now seeing. The original amount would actually have been much better, but the government had already made all of those changes and so couldn't posthumously then change it back to over 8% for this year. It has been reinstated from next April. So whatever the September inflation figure is this year is going to determine what the state pension rise is next year. But that's no good for now. So for this year, from this April now to next April, pensioners are getting far less than the rise in prices.
Right, so this is worrying. So it's not. So if they tighten their purse, it's not going to quite work out. They'll actually have to cut things out, as Jackie was talking about, cutting out things.
Pensioners, they don't have any income coming in. They don't have any earnings. They can't magic money. They can't side hustle their way out of this.
So what could the government do then to help them? What would be good?
Well, so there is help available. So. There is now, the government announced last week with the spring statement, this extra support fund. Whether or not that's going to be enough to help people is another matter. It's being distributed by local councils. If you feel you are in need of help and could be eligible for that support fund, the idea is that you could get that from your local council. So that's one form of help. Another is pension credit. So not enough people who are eligible for pension credit actually claim it. It's available to all pensioners who are on a low income, and you can be in receipt of some state pension and still be eligible for pension credit. So if you're not sure if you're eligible but you are on a low income, I would suggest finding out because it can top up your income. You may be entitled to other benefits and discounts. And I mean, it sounds like from what Jackie was saying, she's well aware of all the discounts and things that she could be eligible for and is claiming them. But for people that aren't, it's something to look into now, I would say.
Well, Rebecca, thank you very much for that. That's Rebecca O'Connor. She's the Head of Pensions and Savings at Interactive Investor. Right, let's bring my panel in on the conversation. Joining me today is political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. What do you think of that? I mean, this is...
Well, the whole system is broken, and it's been like that since the Second World War. And it's because we created a culture, a political culture, where during elections, we allow the political class to offer plasters for the elderly and the people who actually end up coming out to vote. And so during the elections, they abandon the younger people who don't really vote, as by default. And then, throughout the term in Parliament, then they actually abandon the people who voted for them because the system is so complicated and so idiotic. For example, this triple lock, why is it called lock? But it could easily be unlocked. Lock makes you, when David Cameron, for example, promises that, people assume this is a guarantee, this is safe. But then that's not even a good policy because it's not really a proper guarantee. I'm a libertarian, so I believe the state should be small, apart from obviously the policing and defence and basic safety net. And with all the spendings that we have in all these countries in the West, prioritising a safety net should be towards the elderly and people, the pensioners, because you can't call them shirkers. You expect the 80-year-old to actually work. That's the time when you actually get your contribution back. So it's not the same debate when 20-year-old on benefits. It's a completely different debate. And I don't know why we're not doing it. Because
come quickly to Christine as well.
Well, I mean, the betrayal of pensioners over the triple lock was an absolutely grotesque. I mean, the government absolutely promised this, and it's not the pensioners' fault that the situation became rather difficult for the government. It's appalling that they didn't honour that. And one of the other groups I'd like to talk about are the Waspi Pensioners.
Oh, yes, of course.
Who are the women who, because they suddenly decided to equalise the state pension age, which I agree with, but they should have tapered it off. So I'm lucky because I'm so old that I was entitled to the pension when I was 60. People who are not that much younger than me have to wait till they're 67, which is grotesque. And there are a lot of women, Waspi women, who are in dire need. And another thing, just to go back to what that pensioner was saying, she was detailing the things she had to buy, bread, milk, lemon squash. Jack Munro, the poverty campaigner, has highlighted what I think is something which people tend to forget, is that the inflation rise in food seems to be much higher in the basic goods, which are what the people at the bottom of the economic heap need to buy.
And it's the things that we have to keep on buying. Well, today we're looking into the impact of the cost of living crisis and having on people across the UK. So we thought that we'd go to the four corners of the country to hear from our great British voices to find out how they're coping with the rising costs. Let's start by going to Dudley in the West Midlands to speak to Reverend James Treasure, the resourcing church leader at Top Church in Dudley.
Lovely name.
So, James, how are you and others in Dudley being impacted by this cost of living crisis and also this price rise?
Yeah, thank you, Nana. It's the issue in Dudley, is what everybody is talking about. It's the lived experience, really. There's not a day that goes by that somebody in my team isn't being asked to help either with the cost of living, with food, with accommodation. And it's just getting worse, isn't it? I was speaking to the CEO of the Black Country Food Bank, and she was telling me in February alone, there's a 20% increase of use. And that's, dread to think what's going to be happening in April, May and June as the months roll on. But the biggest new users of Food Bank, were exactly the people you're talking about, is the pensioners. And it's these people who've worked all their lives, living on a state pension, and now having the indignity of going to food banks to feed themselves. And that's the generation that know how to cut the cloth, but there's no cloth left to cut. And I think what we will see is churches and charities and community organisations rising up to take on some of these challenges and to care for people. But all we can do is put a plaster on it. What we really need is government initiatives and government kind of leadership to really address some of these bigger issues. And that's what I'm hoping we will get. We haven't had yet.
Well, let's hope. Let's keep hoping, Reverend, because we're all hoping. That's Reverend James Treasure, our great British voice. Next, let's go over to Scotland now and speak to James Sutherland, who's in Edinburgh. He's the owner of 56 North Scotland's oldest gin bar. Hello, James. How is the cost of living crisis affecting business there?
It's business is ticking along, but it's the squeeze on our costs. Everything is going up and it's varying. I mean, the lowest we're seeing is 5 to 7%. We're seeing drastically greater than that in other areas. I've just reinsured us for this year, and it's gone up 22%.
I mean, it's astronomical costs there, aren't there? Well, James, look, thank you so much for that. That's James Sutherland. He's a GB voice. He's there in Edinburgh. Right, let's travel over 200 miles across the Irish Sea to Snowdonia in Wales. Gareth Wynne Jones is a farmer there. Gareth, thank you for joining us. How is the cost of living crisis affecting you?
Well, I'll just give you an example with red diesel. A few months ago it was 58 to 60 pence a litre. It's £1.20 a litre. Our fertiliser last year was £240 a tonne. It's £1,000 a tonne plus now. Filling my quad was £25. That's up to £35. All these costs will have to be put onto the consumer and the customer. So, you know, it's scary times. We are at a brink of a bit of a problem with food and energy because, you know, we've got to heat our homes, we've got to milk the cows, and all that's coming from electric. So everything is going to have a knock-on effect, and it's going to hit people, you know, with the minimum wage and people that are struggling. It's going to really hit them hard.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot we can do. But I think we need a farming food revolution in this country. You know, we need to start producing more energy in this country for ourselves.
Yeah, I'm with you, Gareth. Catherine Jones, thank you for that. He's a GB voice there in Snowdonia. And finally to Northern Ireland, Ken Sharp owns a hotel in Bangor near Belfast. Ken, thank you for joining us. Now, how are people feeling in Northern Ireland about this cost of living crisis?
Yeah, certainly it's impacting on everybody, businesses, whether you're a private individual, whatever. The prices of petrol seem just to keep going up. That impacts onto everyone. The costs of electricity, gas, insurance, all those things. But then we're also sitting without an assembly at the minute. We're just about to go into an election due to various political issues. There was a £300 million that didn't get spent to help people. So, yeah, there's a real squeeze here at the minute.
Well, listen, Ken, thank you for that. That's Ken Sharp. He's a GB voice there and a hotel owner in Bangor in Northern Ireland. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. And I'm still with my panellists, political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Coming up, it's the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? On the day that millions of households in the UK saw their energy bills go up, protesters blocked 10 major oil terminals as they demand the government stop new oil and gas projects. I'll be speaking to someone from the organisation and asking, are the campaign to Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? We'll be back in a moment.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
It's just coming up to 27 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and on my panel today, political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Right, so it's time for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or are they just disruptive? Protesters from Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil have blocked 10 oil terminals across England today. They're demanding that the government stops at new oil and gas projects. But on a day where millions of households across the UK are seeing their energy costs spiral, I'm asking, are the protesters a force for good or just disruptive? I'm now joined by Graham Buss. He's the spokesperson for Just Stop Oil and a former principal scientist at Shell. Graham, thank you for joining us. OK, so why are you protesting across England today?
Well, we're protesting for a very simple reason. We're protesting because we're in the middle of a climate crisis and our government needs to just stop oil. And as you've said, it's very simple. The government needs to not issue any new licenses for oil and gas. And the government needs to get a grip and make this commitment, make a plan and deliver it.
Yeah, but, you know, so far your activists, they've chained themselves to fuel tankers. One tied himself to a goalpost at the Everton versus Newcastle United match at Goodison Park, and you've even disrupted the BAFTAs. With this current crisis going on with Ukraine and the whole, Vladimir Putin, are you then pleased? Would you be pleased if Putin stopped supplying the West with oil?
What we're doing is not part of the war. We are not, that is not, there's always a problem. There's always a reason why you can't act. That we are doing this because we're in the middle of a climate crisis and we have to act. Now, the oil is the reason why we have a war. The sooner we move out of it, the better.
So you would be happy then if he stopped supplying the West with oil? Just out of interest, because they're saying you don't want us to be doing this and everything. So in a way, if he stopped supplying the West with oil, that would actually be good for your cause.
I think for the United Kingdom, we get very little oil from the North Sea. So as far, we're essentially self-sufficient in oil in the UK. So, but we don't get oil from Russia to any significant degree at all. I think it would make no difference to us.
Now, look, we all want a healthy planet, and that, and that's all very well demanding it. But what are your realistic alternatives then?
Look, it's very simple. Our government needs to get a grip. It's digging a hole. It's digging our children's graves. By signing new licenses, it's driving a coach and horses through the government's carbon climate commitments. It's criminally negligent. What we're doing is part of addressing this terrible crisis that we face. If we don't address this crisis, it's going to get much, much worse for us. We have to address this, and we have to do it now. I mean, I think you're going to ask, what about the risks if we don't act? What we have to remember is that the people who are engaged in this non-violent civil resistance, they're ordinary people like me. I'm former principal scientist for Shell. These are ordinary people sounding the fire alarm in a burning building. I have immense respect for them, putting their futures, their careers, their freedom on the lines for our children's future. This is about our children's future.
Well, you talked about the job that you did with Shell, and so I presume you're probably a relatively wealthy pensioner in respect, or you know what I mean? This whole idea of stopping production of oil right now and the current cost of living crisis...
No, not production of oil right now. We're saying no new licenses for oil and gas projects. That gives us, from the North Sea, roughly 8 years at current consumption of oil and gas. Now, that's plenty of time to move to have a transition out of oil and gas. We could do that in that period. Once we set that target, once we make that commitment, we can make that happen.
But to what, though? Because in 8 years, you're saying 8 years, you think we've got an 8-year reserve. Within 8 years, what will be ready to supply the rest of the United Kingdom then, if not oil and gas?
We have to move to renewables. That means that we have to start insulating our homes. That means we have to start managing demand. We have to improve our public transport systems. And we have to build a lot more renewable infrastructure.
Well, that sounds quite heavy on the carbon itself, just doing all that within that time. But we hear what you're saying. A lot of people wouldn't probably disagree with you. But ultimately, the protests would probably be quite disruptive to a lot of people, and especially now with the cost of living crisis. They don't
have to be disruptive at all, Nana. If the government follows this very simple request that we're making, this very simple demand, let's not forget that what we're demanding is a mainstream position. The International Energy Agency called for it last year. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change called for it. Our PM called for it before COP26. The UN General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, he called for it too. We have to end our addiction to oil. And the sooner we end that addiction to oil, the sooner we can ensure that in the future we don't have this kind of cost of living crisis.
But listen, I hear you, but we are ultimately going that way anyway, so I'm not quite sure why it feels that the protest is timed just at the point where we're struggling with the cost of living. Graham, thank you so much for joining us. That's Graham Buss. He's the spokesperson for Just Stop Oil and former principal scientist of Shell. So I'm asking, excuse me, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Andrew says, in a democracy, we have the right to protest. It doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. Doug says the police really ought to be getting them off the road. Let's see, who's this? Sarah. Sarah says, I just feel bad that young people are so anxious about the climate. The science is scary and it can be easy to get overwhelmed with fear for the state of the planet. Right, well, yes, keep those thoughts coming at GB News, but right now this is GB News online on digital radio and on TV. I'm Nana Akua. Coming up, we'll continue our great British debate. I'm asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? You'll hear the thoughts from my panel, political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christina Hamilton. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you. It's 5:33. I'm Miranda Shunker in the newsroom. Formal criminal and civil investigations have been launched into P&O Ferries surrounding the recent redundancies. P&O Ferries boss Peter Hebblethwaite admitted breaking the law when the company sacked 800 seafarers last month, replacing them with agency workers on cheaper salaries. The first fines have been issued by the Met Police investigating parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. The fixed penalty notices relate to one of the earliest events under investigation held in the Cabinet Office on June the 18th, 2020. The £50 fines have reportedly been emailed to junior civil servants. The cost of living crisis deepens for many households in Britain from today as the energy price cap rise comes into effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. It comes ahead of the increase to national insurance. Meanwhile, the Red Cross has sent teams to the southern port city of Mariupol and says it's hopeful the evacuation of thousands of civilians can begin. Moscow had agreed to open a humanitarian corridor, but Ukrainian officials say they're breaking their promise and that it's still very dangerous for anyone attempting to enter or leave. And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today as another record number of people in the UK have had COVID. At the end of last week, an estimated 4.9 million people had it, up from 4.3 million the week before, according to the Office for National Statistics. Well, on TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. We'll be straight back to Nana after the break.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now let's get back to our Great British debate this hour. I'm asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? Protesters from the organisation have blocked oil terminals across England today as part of demands that the government stops new oil and gas projects. GB News reporter Amelia Harper spoke to one protester earlier.
Need to just stop oil, and if that's wind turbines, then I think that's a much, much smaller price to pay than the end of civilization as we know it, and I'm not exaggerating. We need to stop oil now, or our children will have no future.
Well, it's hysterical, isn't it? I mean, but no wonder a lot of children have anxiety over this. They call it eco-anxiety. I mean, seriously, that woman. But as millions of households across the UK face a cost of living crisis with energy prices spiking from today, I'm asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive or just hysterical? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by a political YouTuber, Maya Tusi, and media personality and writer, Christine Hamilton. Christine, I'll come to you straight away. I mean, you saw that woman. She's...
First of all, let us all agree that everybody has a right to be heard.
Absolutely.
Everybody, free speech, etc., etc. So they have every right, but they do not have every right to block other people, etc., etc. So we're all in favour of free speech, but not that sort of obstructive stuff. I don't know where to begin. And with the gentleman who was on ex-Shell fellow, there is no climate crisis. This is the first thing. We haven't got time to debate the whole climate crisis argument, but people are getting themselves whipped up into a frenzy. I mean, this country could... Well, I don't know about this country, but the whole of Wales could shut down. That's all the people, all the animals, all the industry, all the sheep even, everything could shut down. And China, the output from China would overtake in a couple of weeks because they're building all these new coal-fired power stations. I mean, they just... I don't know where to begin, but here we go. I mean, what we need to do is not build a few more windmills that are pretty hopeless. You know, we need to get the North Sea oil and gas out there. We need to start fracking. We need to start opening up the coal-fired power stations again, like Drax. At the moment, Drax is being fuelled by wood chips that we import. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Stop decommissioning nuclear power stations. I mean, we do need to get real about all this, but not in the way that... I mean, that woman was unbelievable. You'd think the Earth was coming to an end.
It was like chicken licking in the sky.
Down. Okay, firstly, I'll be honest. I can't take anyone seriously who wears an adult nappy to go to these protests, because they were being interviewed throughout the day. They were saying that they were wearing nappies so that they could stay. I can't take it seriously if you wear a nappy.
Nappy?
Yeah,
I didn't see that.
Secondly, read the room. We are going through a cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
And then there are a couple of issues. As we discussed earlier in the show, that just because you speak to, as an MP, to speak to your constituents doesn't mean you understand real people, or just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you can run the Department of Education. Dr. Boss, who is the spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, was part of Shell, yet
exactly.
he didn't even know his basic facts. Whether, he was saying, well, we don't really get much from the North Sea or Russia, even though we're getting quarter from that in terms of oil and gas overall. He didn't know that his campaign and his people saying, we have, depending on who you speak to, either 2 years or 4 years or 24 hours to save the world. Yeah, they were saying, yeah, we're panicking, but it's okay, we have 8 years. To, just like, don't build new ones in 8 years. So you're going to be fine. So 8 years is fine. Yes, but we're going to die in 4 years.
I know. So it does,
Unbelievable.
And the thing is, if he did work for Shell all those years ago, then he has been complicit in part of this in some respects, hasn't he? For while he was working there. And that's not insulting him. That's not an insult.
No, it's
if you worked for them, that is a fact, right?
Fact.
Yeah. So it's all very well you turning around saying, oh, well, we need to be doing this now. Yeah. But hang on a minute. What about, the back bit where you were working for them?
Can I add one quick thing? Yeah. There's another kind of dark truth and reality no one's really talking about. Whilst actually it's very disruptive what they're doing, really, and especially now, there is a problem with the police and the government, where when Insular Britain were blocking roads, ordinary people driving, took them, a few months to arrest like 4 or 5 of them. Today, they arrested 19 of them because they were blocking corporations and big oil and gas companies. And that, is a weird kind of question no one's actually talking about. And it should be a debate for all the time.
But do you think that they're doing that now because of the ridiculous
reactionary thing? But why was it not as important, or at least important enough, when it was in Slip Britain doing it to ordinary people, going to work, going to hospital, emergencies. But now that, they're panicking because everything's in the headlines, now they're trying to arrest people. Like, oh, interesting.
Well, I think it's about time. Listen, I don't disagree with the idea that we should try and reduce our reliance on fossil fuel in some respects, but I don't really think fossil fuel is 100% Satan and an enemy from within, because a lot of those other fuels that they're talking about will then be powered by fossil fuels and things. So and we're also, whilst we talk about how we don't use too much fossil fuel, we're offsetting our carbon to things like China. So
exactly.
So all it is an equation that makes us look better. So we'll just do the sums and look at us, aren't we net zero?
It makes us feel really good, doesn't it? And smug. All the time, the same. Output is going on exactly. We're just exporting the problem.
Yeah. So to me, listening to that, I just think, well, please, no wonder the kids. I did this piece about eco-anxiety and how the kids are just hysterical because they don't believe there'll be a planet left for them, and we evil adults are destroying it for them. Look, we want to live on this planet ourselves. We want to stay on here as well.
And what these young people seem to forget, they look at sort of fogies like me and they think, well, you'll be dead soon. It doesn't matter to you. People like me I haven't got children, but we've got nephews and nieces and grandchildren. That's what they don't understand. Virtually everybody in this country, whatever age they are, has a massive stake in the future of the planet. Just because you're old, it does not mean to say that you don't care.
Well, exactly. And we want to make sure that the choices that the government make are the correct ones. Because remember, we were all told to buy diesel. Now diesel is the spawn of Satan. Do you know what I mean? So we want to make sure with this whole electric revolution, I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced what you're going to pull up the ground everywhere, put these things in, then you're going to have a cable, somebody could trip over, then I'm going to have to buy a completely new car that's got every single component. Something goes wrong. Will it be like a phone battery that after a couple of years you have to replace the entire thing because the rest of it...
My problem is they have a similar problem to a lot of left-wing causes. It's all about making themselves feel better. Their problem is, like a lot of other movements, they're not pro-something, they're more anti-something. So they're not really pro-green, because if they were pro-green, then nuclear is green. Then, fracking, if you do it safely and in future wise, it'll be a lot cleaner and cheaper than, your kind of old school ones. They're not pro anything. They're more anti what's happened until now. And
well, he didn't have an alternative, did he? Because I said, after the 8 years, what would you do? Or more renewables? Well, which ones and how and what? Because 8 years isn't actually that long to get the infrastructure in place if you're going to remove fossil fuels. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in that time, is it?
And these people never stop to think also about the energy input into their mobile phones, into their electric cars, etc. They never, or to make a heat pump, for example.
Starbucks.
Well, exactly. Or even the insulation, what they're going to use to insulate the walls. But let's see what you're saying, because today we're asking, are Just Stop Oil a cause for good or just disruptive? And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Toby says at the end of the day, they've got a point. Renewables, insulation and even nuclear are definitely the future of energy for the UK. Yeah, listen, Toby, nobody's arguing with them, but I think we already knew that, and that's where we're headed. So we just don't get why they're bothering with this. Stuart says, they're so disruptive. Let's remove them from blockading the highway. Yeah, absolutely. John says they are super disruptive and are doing nothing to encourage people to support their cause. Willow says oil is actually incredibly dangerous and disruptive, and it's good that we're having a discussion about it. It can kill surface-dwelling animals and birds by poisoning or suffocation. Yeah, and I think the panel would agree that oil isn't the best thing if we can find an alternative. But what's the point of doing what they're doing? Nothing's going to happen with that. But I though want to move on and ask you about foreign aid, because we've been talking about the cost of living crisis, but yet we continue to give foreign aid to certain countries that I don't believe we actually need to be giving the aid to. And we're doing that. In 2020, the UK government spent £14.5 billion on humanitarian assistance, with Ethiopia, Nigeria, Somalia, Afghanistan and Yemen receiving the most money. Last year, the Conservative government reduced the UK's annual aid budget from 0.7% of gross national income to 0.5%. But with Brits facing the biggest cost of living squeeze in a generation, I want to ask if we should go further with cutting foreign aid. So let's see what my panel make of that. Joining me now, it's political YouTuber Maya Tusi and media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. Quickly over to you, Maya. Foreign aid.
Depends what we mean by it, because some people are talking about the the emotions of international charity that to make basically ourselves feel better about us, about our country, that we are doing better, and then we have to help the kind of the countries that are not completely developed. Then you got the second part that is in our interest to do investment. And so that we can
which country would you say? What about India?
But that's the problem I have. Firstly, clarify what is foreign aid as a state and as a country, because the first one should not be a priority right now, because we still have our own people to look after. So I'm not even talking about cutting it. That part of it, almost abolish it, at least for now, until we discover how we can actually help our own people. This European guilt that we created is really weird, because people assume, especially on the left, that we've always been superior and we feel sorry for them. We're patronising all the other countries and nations. There was a time when Europe and all the villages and Eastern empires were running the world, but now we feel so like, we need to help them now. In terms of the actual investment and trade, that's different. I'm very much pro going to help him with cooperation and trade, and that doesn't mean that we're going to give free money to dictators. It actually means actual cooperating with, ironically, for once, corporations or big businesses that actually have the money to go to these places to actually work with each other and create trading routes and cooperation, not free money to dictators.
Christine?
Well, absolutely, and not necessarily only to dictators, but free money to people in some of these countries who are actually not... Nobody objects to sending humanitarian aid when there's a disaster or a crisis, and nobody objects, I don't think, to sending a reasonable amount of money to, the poorer countries. But what is happening is we're sending a vast amount of money to the middle-income countries, which amazingly include China and India, I mean, both of whom have sent rockets to the moon. What in God's name are we doing when we have pensioners in our own country going to food banks, pensioners like the lady we saw earlier who cannot struggle with the cost of living, sending aid to countries like that, countries to China, which, for example, is not condemning Russia for what they're doing in Ukraine. It's a nonsense. And as I understand it, I'm not an expert on this, but most of the aid that goes to these middle-income countries doesn't go through the international overseas, whatever it's called, the DF, whatever. It's going from other Whitehall departments, and they don't seem to see it in such simplistic terms. They're sending it there. They're making trade arrangements are fine, but they don't seem to have the sort of humanitarian scales correct, and so they're sending it to the wrong countries for the wrong things. And I mean, it's.
We need to start. I think we need to start over. We need to start over.
Accountability has gone. That's the trouble.
It's almost like it's like a chest puffing exercise to say we are the United Kingdom. We will do this. We will hold our standing in the world. We will send aid to China. I don't think so. They're looking at us thinking, what a bunch of fools. Why would you do that?
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
It doesn't give us any, people don't think we're being clever by doing that. And I don't know why we're carrying on with that. No. But anyway, let's end the show soon with a quick fire debate. Let's do that, where we discuss some of the other stories making the headlines for today. So let's start with this one. Today is April Fool's Day, which means that people from across the world have been playing pranks and stitch-ups on each other. Some of the highlights include a food retailer, Ocado, saying it would start offering a roast dinner in a jar, which could be served in an ice cream sundae glass. Interesting. The airline Emirates also said that it would be offering a new delivery service called Emir Eats, which will deliver worldwide homemade curries from India or steak fresh from an Australian barbecue. It's quite a good idea. Actually, somebody might take that up. So have you ever believed in an April Fool prank, Christine?
Well, I read something this morning in one of the tabloids, and I think it's a prank. They said that goldfish can count to 5. And then there was this terribly complicated thing that they'd done with goldfish, and they were going through various gates, and according to which gate... Now, that must be an April Fool.
Must be.
A goldfish can't count to 5, can they?
Well, there used to be a time I used to fall for these pranks. But now, it's all so repetitive and boring. I was the grumpy one today. I tweeted saying, if anybody posts all the boring ones, I'll block
Yeah, nobody can fool me. It doesn't work on me. I think everyone's joking anyway. Well, listen, the next story is actually, Christine mentioned it, is about fish.
Oh.
And actually, it's been proven that they can do the maths.
No.
Christine, yeah. A study, so it wasn't April Fool's, which involved showing fish different coloured cards, found stingrays can add and subtract just like humans. So do you think...
I can't believe that was not set up, everybody, by the way. I had no idea that was coming.
So do you think then with that
It wasn't
in mind,
an April Fool.
No, it wasn't. It was true. So do you reckon Rishi Sunak could, perhaps the fish could do
Fish for
Rishi's
Prime
job?
Minister.
Well, we better send Rishi through these gates and these things that the fish was sent through and see if he can do it.
Yeah, he probably won't be able to. And finally, staff at University College London said a library book that was nearly 50 years overdue was recently sent back to them in the post. The person who sent it back anonymously has left a note which read, "Please don't just throw it out now that I've taken the time and trouble to return it. It must be an antique by now." So do you have any library books that you should perhaps have sent back?
I got a Blockbuster.
Really?
VHS tape. Yeah.
Wow, what a
old
difference.
School. I know.
Whoa,
What to do with it? I'm not going to
video.
send it anyway, so...
Really?
I basically committed a crime. I just basically admitted a crime.
On TV as well,
I don't
you stolen
pretend.
video.
Yeah, I forgot I had it, but yeah. No books, no.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have. It's a long time since I've taken a book out of a library. No, I don't think I have. Not guilty on that.
I do. I've got 5 books. Now, they were all, and they've got like the little plastic over them and everything.
Oh,
I've got 5 of them. They were for my daughter. I read them all to her. And then one time, the library did like one of those amnesty type things that you could bring in the books, and I forgot to do it. And I was like, oh, God. And then I thought, oh, God, well, if I do bring it back, it's going to be fined. And every time I move house, I see these books and go, oh, I should really return those. And I've still got them to this day. And I'm actually scared to return them now, just in case
You can do it anonymously, like this gentleman did.
But just in case I get a fine.
Say it publicly, can't it?
Oh, yeah, sorry. But how much would the fine be is what I'm
Monumental,
worried about.
don't do it.
Yeah.
Do it anonymously.
Yeah. So I
Naughty girl.
I know. Yeah. And there was another book as well, Hitler's Mein Kampf. I actually took that book from the library at...
Because you were passionate about it?
No. Years ago when I went to boarding school, so this was a long time ago, they had the book in the library and I meant to read it. I never read it. I also didn't send it back.
Oh, no.
If they're watching me.
Maybe a few more people had read it before the war. They might have realised what was in his mind, but there we are.
Well, listen, on the show today, I've also been asking, should MPs have their pay rise withdrawn? And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Reginald says they're obviously still going to get their pay rise, so how about they individually decide to decline it as a point of principle? Well, you'd think, wouldn't you? That's not going to happen, is it? Tom says being an MP is actually a really hard job. They're not perfect, but lots of them try their level best to represent their constituents. Their high salary is fair for the job that they do. Rachel says that it should definitely be the highest paid who have to help with this cost of living crisis. The MP's salary increase is annoying, but the worst thing is the profits that oil and gas companies, the idea of putting a windfall tax on them, which Labour were campaigning for, would be very fair. I kind of agree with you on that, although lots of people object to it, but I don't think they've given me a good enough reason. Wilson says, I'm sick to death of this government, how they have no understanding of real life and definitely shouldn't be getting a pay rise. Well, there's also been a poll up on Twitter asking whether MPs should have their pay rise withdrawn, and guess what? Not much change. 84% of you say yes, they should, and 16% of you say no. So the definitive, what do you think? Should they have it withdrawn, Maya?
No, I should give it to HMRC because Rishi Sunak has created this new route so they could actually give the money back.
Just to give it back.
Yeah.
There's no mechanism to do it. They've got to make an individual decision to do it, to give it to a worthy cause, which is not themselves.
Well, give it to me.
Yeah. Not themselves, absolutely. Well, listen, I've got to say thank you so much, my amazing panellists. Christine Hamilton, thank you, Christine, and also Maya Tusi for joining me. It's been a pleasure as ever. And a big thank you to you at home for listening. I'll be back tomorrow at 4. I'll leave you with the weather. Up next, it's Jubes & Co.
Hello again. Bit of a chill out there this afternoon, and it's not going to get much warmer over the weekend. It's going to be cold and frosty tonight, an ice risk, and still some sleet and snow showers in a few spots. High pressure, though, is in control of our weather, and it will bring most of us a fine weekend. But there's this weather front driving south, and notice the isobars are still quite close together, making for quite a strong wind and an icy wind this evening across Kent. But the showers here are fading. Some showers keeping going over parts of eastern England, which is why it could turn icy here. And we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. And then wet weather heading south across Northern Ireland. Mostly rain here, but as it comes across Wales, we will see some snow here, mostly over hills, but some down to lower levels, particularly through the early hours. It is going to be a cold night with a fairly extensive frost even in towns and cities, and some rural spots maybe down to -5 or -6. Watch out for the ice in the morning as well. Still some wintry showers coming in across eastern England. Showers across South Wales, southwest England in the morning, mostly of rain, but again, some sleet, snow and hail is possible. And we'll keep 1 or 2 scattered showers across England and Wales through the day, but some good spells of sunshine. Most of Scotland and Northern Ireland having a dry, fine Saturday with some sunshine, but it ain't warm. Temperatures in single figures for the most part, but those strong, bitter winds will be much lighter during Saturday. Light winds and clear skies, though, means tumbling temperatures once more. So if you're out on Saturday night, be prepared for that. It will be a cold and frosty start to Sunday. Again, where we keep 1 or 2 showers going, it could also be a little icy on Sunday morning. Generally, though, another fine day for the vast majority. Maybe 1 or 2 showers around the coast in the west and the east coast. It will cloud over across Northern Ireland during Sunday afternoon with some rain trickling in here and into northwestern parts of Scotland. But for many, Sunday is also dry and bright. Still on the cold side, however, with highs of just 9 or 10 Celsius. Goodbye.